Love is a game.
You distinguish yourself by not calling her.
4 days he waits to call me.
Easy to start.
It's a very nice hat you're wearing, and I don't mean that in an Eddie Haskell kind of way.
Hard to finish.
Linda.
Bye, Steve.
I left my blue t-shirt at home.
If you can't find love, you settle for sex. Sex. Sex.
Hi, this is Alex, and you're listening to the Doomed Planet podcast, episode number 80. 2 Seattle dive bar dicks. The first dick would be Dick Smith, owner of the Mecca Cafe in Seattle's Lower Queen Anne neighborhood. The second dick would be Dave Meinert, who allegedly was putting his dick where it was not wanted. I think the definition of a dive bar is basically an establishment where the owner doesn't give a shit. So it'll be dirty and run down and, unsavory clientele. And of course, old men. If you've ever been in a bar at 9 a.m, it's a bunch of old men. Dick Smith owned the Mecca Cafe and also the 5 Point Cafe. Those 2 dives are now owned by accused rapist David Meinert. Dick Smith. He died in 2001. He inherited the 5 Point Cafe and the Mecca Cafe from his parents. According to the Seattle Times obituary, he was a 6'2" bear of a man. The Seattle Times staff writer, Sarah Jean Green, is reporting all these outlandish stories as fact in this obituary. He wore a full-length fur coat and top hat to skipper his 65-foot yacht, which he outfitted with gold-plated hardware. This guy owned 2 shitty places in Seattle, and he owned a yacht. He took his workers on week-long vacations. That's doubtful. Froze prices for his fixed-income regulars. He opened his home to an elderly customer who had no place else to go. That is true. He and his wife took in this 90-something-year-old man who was a regular customer and let him live in their house. Battled colon cancer since 1997. Was he only 63 when he dies? Yeah, that's... And again, the glamour, David Meinert, who's going to own these same establishments, brings glamour to dive bars. He even creates fake dive bars during his brief reign as king of Seattle nightlife. But back, when Dick Smith owned these places, it's not glamorous. Like, if you're, social climber in Seattle, you want your kids to be doctors and lawyers. And, these dive bars, the hipsters really hadn't discovered them. They were dives in every sense of the word. He was the type of person who, if he received a bill in the mail and there was no envelope, he'd send back the same envelope because, gall darn it, he wasn't going to pay for an envelope. He went to Queen Anne High School. He played semi-pro football for a hometown team. That's not true. He's a diesel mechanic in the Navy. That could be true. He returned home to Seattle in 1962 because his parents needed him to work their dive bars in anticipation of the World's Fair, the big event that really did change Seattle in so many ways. One of the ways was they built a bunch of cheap hotels on Capitol Hill that are now apartment buildings, and they all have quaint names like the El Mondo, where I used to live. He'd paint the bathroom over instead of leaving some graffiti up. He wanted to run a nice joint, said Joe Dolan, a longtime customer. That is a lie. He installed a periscope in the men's bathroom at the 5 Point, where you could get a view of the Space Needle, which is really pretty much across the street. He took employees on yearly week-long vacations to the New Orleans Jazz Festival and the camel races in Virginia City. He wanted to acknowledge their efforts because he knew he couldn't do it without them. Yeah, because no one makes any money working in a crappy bar. The owner might make money, but that's doubtful unless you're, selling drugs out the back or whatever the business plan is, money laundering, but the workers sure as shit don't. He was a scuba diver and art lover. He helped establish the Francis T. Miller Organ Transplant Foundation. I looked really hard to find any evidence of that and could not. Mr. Smith and his fourth wife, Darlene, in 1992, asked Gordon Marwick to live with them. He's the old guy, the regular. He had a very big heart, said his friend Downs. Survived by his children, and here is a Dick Smith obituary from our pal Clark Humphrey. Dick Smith, owner of the Mecca and 5 Point, died of cancer October 1st. Wow, that's right after 9/11, in 2001. He often billed his restaurants as Seattle's oldest family-owned eateries. He had taken them over from his dad in 1975. His dad apparently got in the restaurant business in 1929. I spent a great deal of time. Smith is not a great name to search for. Can't find any evidence of that, but probably true. Both cafes are small spots divided between food counters serving up hearty, inexpensive, unpretentious eats. Unpretentious for sure. The Mecca's menu bears the slogan, "Not fine dining, just a fine diner." And also a smoky, crowded cocktail lounges serving up stiff drinks and raucous conversation. One reason that all these Seattle bars had shitty food or food at all is because it was required by law up until maybe the late 80s, early 90s. It was required by law. If you had an establishment in Seattle that served liquor, you had to serve food. And that's how the worst of Seattle food culture was born. Smith was an outspoken political curmudgeon, keeping his restaurants non-union. The Rendezvous, a legendary dive in Belltown, was a union bar up until 2000 when Steve and Tia took it over. And I love Steve and Tia, and I understand they're not going to make any money if they keep the unionized workers, but Dodie, the legendary bartender there, they offered her a job and she said no because it wasn't going to be union anymore. So Belltown was kind of a union hotspot back in the day. And so, a lot of these bar workers were in a union. So, but of course not the people who toiled for Dick Smith. But, they did get to go to the camel races once 1 week a year, which is more than, people at these other shitty places ever got, I guess. This Clark Humphrey obituary is reprinted at davidmeinert.com. We'll get to that. Some Dick Smith information that is probably true comes from my friend George. And George would hang out in this coffee shop directly across the street from the Mecca, every single day. And so he witnessed some of Dick's antics. In 1979, the Susan B. Anthony dollar was introduced, and coin collectors everywhere enthused. Mecca owner Dick Smith posted a sign behind the bar, "No bitch dollars." According to George, in the early 80s, a waitress from the Mecca was on strike, and she'd spent a great deal of time for months on end, years actually, occasionally picketing in front of the store, pacing back and forth in all kinds of weather. Flying home from his private island, Dick Smith read an article in an in-flight magazine about the perils of graffiti. Okay, George, that's not true. He did not have a private island. And he decided someone had to take a stand. Okay, this part is true. Smith found a can of old, shocking, eye-burning pink paint. And he took it out onto the street, and he was covering all the graffiti tags, which just made matters worse, especially if you're on window panes or stucco or brick. He was, taking graffiti and then plastering this pink paint everywhere repeatedly. And the police were eventually called, and Ah, oh, he painted a mailbox pink, and that's a federal crime. So he got in some kind of trouble. They made him fix it. The police made Smith pour the bucket of pink paint down the storm drain. For days after, mariners could see a long, lonesome pink streak beautifying Puget Sound. And that is not true. In the early 90s, Smith was grousing to his bartender about the dirty hippies taking up space in the back booth of the bar. The bartender explained it was a couple members of Pearl Jam and some other grunge rock stars. What? Exclaimed Smith. I've heard of those guys. At the time, there was a backlit yellow sign by the front door saying the Mecca Cafe. At considerable expense, he replaced it with a matching sign that said Seattle's original grunge bar. The rock stars instructed him to take it down or they'd never be back, and he did, griping, "Everybody's making money off this thing. Why can't I?" Okay, he probably never said that, but that story of the sign is well documented. And again, it's the 90s, and hipsters like me are discovering these dive bars because they had so much character and atmosphere, or lack thereof. This is true, January 30th, 1998, Smith's gruff demeanor concealed a heart of gold. While Mary Kay Letourneau was on probation for raping the preteen Vili Fulau, Smith hosted her 36th birthday party at the Mecca, complete with cake and decorations. That's just 2 days before her final rape of Fulau in her steam-filled Subaru. She was out on parole, had this party, got caught with the same kid in her car. Mary Kay served 7 years in prison for violating her parole. And then she got back together with Vili after she got out of prison. And sadly, she died a few years ago of cancer. If you want to know more about Mary Kay Letourneau, check out Doomed Planet episode 48, Hot for Student. Thank you, George, for providing these eyewitness accounts of Dick's antics. There's one more. One day I saw heavy black smoke billowing from their roof. I ran over and said they were on fire. No, they said just burning off the grease in their fryer vent. They do this once a year. Hopefully they still don't do it. It's kind of like how Burger King, if you've noticed that, they have this gimmick where they burn out there's smoke gushing out of every store at a certain time of day as if they're burning off or cleaning something. Just very foul. I'm happy to report that the Burger King on Rainier Avenue near where I live was abandoned and recently caught fire. So now it's a rubble, graffiti-filled wet rubble. So good riddance.
And now a word from our sponsor.
Yay! I'm the marvelous, magical Burger King. I can do most anything. Now watch me, kids, when I twist my ring like magic.
We're at Burger King!
Speaking of kings, former king of Seattle nightlife, David Meinert, has been trying to rehab his image lately at davidmeinert.com and also on the websites for the Dick Smith establishments that he now owns. Here's a description of on the Mecca website about Dick Smith, sort of taken from the Seattle Times a bit, and also from other fake legends that never happened. It says Dick Smith did not pay off the cops. No, every bar in town paid off the cops up until the late 1960s when it became a big scandal. So that's not true. The liquor board took away his license in 1933. Okay, that's not Dick Smith. That's C. Preston Smith and his wife, Frances, Dick's parents. During World War II, Preston and Frances again got caught up in the meat grinder of human history. It was a struggle to stay open during those difficult times. Really? Because in World War II, Seattle was thriving and downtown was filled with hungry and thirsty soldiers. Dick took over in 1975. He made these places legendary by pulling off all sorts of stunts. He spent $3,000 of his own money in the 1970s to build an illegal children's park at 3rd and Bell Street. That's now a dog park, okay? During the grunge era, the Five Point and Mecca became notorious joints. Many of the more famous and plenty of the less famous musicians hung out in. Most recent decade, the Five Point has faced controversy when David Meinert was the first business owner to ban Google Glass. Musician Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine showed up and refused to wait in line, demanding access to the private room, which didn't exist. So he got into a feud with Meinert. But the Google Glass thing, so Google Glass was this failed attempt to sell people on these surveillance sunglasses or glasses that you'd wear that would be filming everything. And David didn't want that. And this goes back, okay, let's go back to Facebook. David used to have 5,000 friends, and I was one of them. And the only time he ever responded to a comment that I left on his page was when he was talking about this banning Google glasses. And I just mentioned, from my knowledge of dive bar history, these places like the Frontier Room and Sorry Charlie's, or places in downtown Seattle, these dives all had like no photography rules, no cameras allowed. And the reason for that is that, Seattle businessmen or whoever would carouse at these bars, and, maybe there'd be prostitutes. There's definitely gambling. And so they wanted to, preserve their privacy. And, David liked that. And at the time I thought, and he called me a knower of Seattle history. That's kind of what I describe myself as. Not sure if that's proper English. But now that I look back, it's like, yeah, well, David Meinert is carousing, okay? Big time. We cheat tourists and drunks, alcoholics serving alcoholics since 1929. Some of the slogans that they use in their advertising. Just a disclosure, the first time I met Dave Meinert, it was about 10 in the morning. I was with this other friend who knew him, and at the time I didn't think this was odd, but he was with this beautiful blonde German girl, and they had obviously been up all night. I'm not sure what they were on, meth or whatever, psychedelics, and they're being all flirty and huggy. Again, this is 10 in the morning and they're still high. And she apparently was a dominatrix. Like, that's how she made her living, doing sex work of that sort, which is fine. And looking back, I think, wow, first time I met this guy, he was already kind of, I don't know if that's unsavory or not. I mean, we were all young, and drugs and sex are fine, but it creeps me out now. See, further disclosure, Dave was always nice to me. I do remember he carried around like a black notebook, and he'd write down everyone's names and phone numbers and stuff. Like, that's not how I operate, but I admire that. I mean, if you're going to be a rock promoter and a scene-stir guy, maybe that's good. Although, again, maybe there's an unsavory element to the black book, the stalking book or whatever. But oh boy, did we. Okay, and further disclosure, when he first bought the 5 Point, I was publishing a newspaper called the Belltown Messenger, and he bought a generous ad package for us, and I actually put his ad for the 5 Point on the cover of our paper for 6 months, and also featured him and his very pregnant girlfriend at the time on the cover, standing in front of the 5 Point. So always nice to me. Not a bad thing to say about him, other than when I woke up to read this article that knocked me out of my chair. But boy, did we always love Dave Meinert, us Seattleites. If I mention rock promoter, political activist, he was against the $15 minimum wage, which is charming. Otherwise, he's sort of lefty activist. I know I did a website for Jam Pack, which was Dave and Chris Novoselic, joint artist, musician. It's all, the 90s are a blur, but some political activist thing, like trying so bar owners could make money doing all ages shows. Pacific Northwest Magazine, August 6, 2010. Seattle's Dave Meinert is a nightlife entrepreneur and a political player, by Tyrone Beeson. The Capitol Hill Block Party impresario doubles as establishment power broker. Once the provocateur poking fun at the man from the outside, music promoter Meinert has learned to play from the inside, becoming an agent for change in local politics. That is so insane. Now, if he's poking at the man, that might come from this early band that he managed called Chikung, that I saw a few times, and I got to be friends with one of the members of the band. This is like an industrial kind of thing where some of the instruments are like, power tool against a oil drum, stuff like that. It was kind of interesting looking back. I'm glad I had that experience. A lot of stories told by music and nightlife promoter Dave Meinert start with the line, "So I met this guy in a bar." That's a lot of stories of rape victims of Dave Meinert also started with, "So I met this guy in a bar." Again, this is 8 years, this article, before the allegations. Despite hair that's more pushed back than styled, a wardrobe heavy on t-shirts and jeans, and a 5 o'clock shadow that suggests a rocker with a hangover, this 44-year-old is no idle barfly. Meinert is in fact a power broker. Meinert's Seattle is more singles than Grey's Anatomy. His ventures are ambitious while still paying homage to a think local attitude. Capitol Hill Block Party. This is Meinert and a couple of his promoter buddies. I'm not going to mention the names of any of his business partners in this podcast. They found out a way to privatize an area of Capitol Hill to do a hipster, concert event, and they made a fortune from that. Okay, here it is. He joined former Nirvana bassist Chris Novoselic and former Showbox owner Jeff Steichen in the political action group Jam Pack to give the music industry a voice in election campaigns and policy debates. If you know Chris Novoselic these days, he's a committed libertarian, sort of a right-wing chud. Again, we're reading from the hagiography of David Meinert from the Seattle Times, 2010, written by a writer that didn't know better. In one of his frequent columns for the online news site publicola.net, Meinert lashes out at foes of a proposal to use private money to build a Dale Chihuly glass museum and garden next to the Space Needle at Seattle Center. I want to say this to critics of this plan: grow the hell up. Of course, he owns a bar that's like almost directly across the street, and all development and, tourist traffic is good for him. Dale Chihuly, multi-millionaire, might be worth $100 million, and recipient of government PPP, COVID bailout money. I was against this museum. Why should this rich guy build a private museum on public property devoted just to his art? Of course, Publicola, the news site, is run by Erica C. Barnett. You want to know more about her, you can go to Doomed Planet episode number 35. Notorious Seattle boozer, Erica C. Barnett. He speaks authentically while having money on the line. It adds credibility to the conversation for sure, says King County Executive Dow Constantine, a friend of Meinert's who is close enough to him that they can casually swap text messages about meeting for beers on Meinert's birthday. Of course, Dow Constantine is still the King County executive. I've got a ton of photos of him ripped from Facebook with Meinert. And again, Dow Constantine not a rapist that we know of. His approach is refreshing, says John Scholes, policy director for the Downtown Seattle Association. Everybody gets pigeonholed and calcified into these different camps. It's hard to put Dave in a camp. And no, John, Dave is not Jewish. But the Downtown Seattle Association is certainly a fascist organization, that uses straw men small businesses to promote the agenda of giant corporations. They also hate homeless people. Meinert grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household in Normandy Park, south of Seattle, right near Burien, where he lives now. His dad was an executive at Boeing, and his mom was in the chorus of the Seattle Opera.
I am an annuity, but I need cash now.
Call J.G. Wentworth, 877 cash now. 877 cash now.
Seattle Times writer Tyrone Beeson says that to get away from it all, Meinert and his family escaped to a secluded lake on the back roads of Mason County, where his relatives kept summer cabins during his childhood. Recently, he bought a tree-studded 3-acre island in the lake. His dreams of building a small treehouse-style cabin on the island, a legacy to his childhood, and one more reminder that he lives in a paradise teetering, but by no means lost. The 5 Point Cafe is at Tillicum Place, Belltown in Seattle, again across from the Seattle Center. Land, like all this land, indigenous to the Duwamish people before we came and killed most of them and stole their land. This site, right where the 5 Point Cafe is, and the Chief Self bronze statue, it marked the junction of the land claims of Arthur Denny, William Bell, and Carson Boren. In 1908, the city of Seattle commissioned their first piece of public art, the statue of Chief Seattle. It's a beautiful statue by artist James Wen. A good artist with a tragic life. His brother drowned in Lake Washington at age 14. His mom went crazy after that and required constant in-home care. And his wife was murdered. I see that Dave Meinert now has a YouTube channel, posted a handful of videos of him before, the sex crime thing. Interviewed by the Seattle channel, local leaders. Oh no, that's recent. He's on a recent weird podcast. What customers think of Google Glass. And you search for David Meinert, and his davidmeinert.com comes up first, which definitely obscures the remaining, hits on the list that come up about the horrible sex scandal. So yeah, this year he posted some YouTubes, but it's all old stuff. Sawant and Dave Meinert team up for a small business plan. It posted January 20th, 2022, but guaranteed to have happened years earlier. I don't think Sawant would be caught dead, standing at a podium with Dave Meinert. And in fact, everyone, the entire Seattle, intelligentsia, or if that's the right word, they basically cut him loose. DavidMeinert.com. I encourage you to go and buy a 5 Point Cafe flannel shirt for $65. When the sex scandal broke, Meinert hired a PR firm to help him with his troubles, but it turned out one of the women working at the PR firm had also been harassed or abused by Meinert. But again, what are you going to do? You got to keep moving forward. So at DaveMeinert.com, about David Meinert. Dave Meinert has been part of the Seattle music, restaurant, and nightlife community since the 80s. He currently owns 2 of the oldest bars, diners in the greater Seattle area, and a restaurant in Burien called Huckleberry Square. It's like a breakfast joint for old people. Capitol Hill Block Party. He used to own Big Mario's New York Pizza. That was a great place. That was a fake dive pizza place, right? Brand new, all marketing and branding to make it look like it was an old-time New York pizza dive. The Comet Tavern he owned for a while. You know, we could do a whole episode on that place. He said he garnered a bit of influence in regional politics. And then all this stuff, going back to his time at Western Washington University, he always worked for intelligent, fair, and practical political change, whatever that means. His time in college, we have to take his word for it, but he was politically active somehow. In 2000, Meinert and other music and nightlife activists raised money and campaigned for Seattle mayoral candidate Greg Nichols. So yeah, I remember the Stranger weekly newspaper. They thought they were kingmakers for helping Nichols get elected. And of course, Meinert is mentioning this in his bio. He went on to be named one of Seattle's 25 most influential people in Seattle Magazine. Today, David continues to use his influence to fight for change in Seattle and across the region. He was involved in creating Seattle's newest mini-wage law. No, he was against the law. During the COVID epidemic, Meinert was one of the first restaurants in the U.S. to install air cleaning technology, including HEPA filters in HVAC systems. He lucked out with that pandemic, which happened a couple years after his fall from grace. His business partners in all these different ventures forced him out, and he's like, all right, pay me. And he got a lot of money. And this is where, if I had been Dave, I would have said, okay, I'm going to leave Seattle and start a new life with these millions of dollars that I have. And just, he's a smart guy, do something, move to a different country somewhere. But no, he does have a kid, so I guess that ruins everything, right? Dave is so generous with his employees, and again, when he owned tons of restaurants and bars, it's really just a wage exploitation machine. The more employees you have, the more people you're squeezing a wage out of and paying them obviously less than they're worth. That's how you make money. But here's an ad in Craigslist just from today. Legendary dive bar hiring full-time bartender, Queen Anne, Seattle. Compensation $15.75 plus tips and benefits. The legendary Mecca, you're so generous, David. $15.75. Before the pandemic, there was not a restaurant in town that was starting people at less than $16. The legendary Mecca Cafe is looking for a fast bartender who can also serve food. Great benefits and tips. We're looking for a great bartender to work 4 shifts. Must be thick-skinned, have an ironic, sarcastic sense of humor, hard worker, have experience in at times a fast-paced, busy bar environment, and have experience serving food. So that whole ironic, sarcastic sense of humor, that's the whole dive bar adage of the owner doesn't give a shit and the people that work there are assholes. The Mecca is a fun, casual place to work, a bit edgy. And you have to be willing to deal with people you may disagree with politically or socially, but can also toss out if they are assholes. The Mecca iconic Dave Bar, that's a typo, in existence for 92 years. We are in the center of the action. Our longstanding regular customers, some of whom have been here since the 1930s and 40s. Okay, so if you were 20 in, let's just say 1940, how old would you be now? Including tips, our employees make anywhere from $22 to $50 an hour. All employees will get PTO, can be used for sick and safe time or vacation time. That's required by law. 401k with employer matching and profit share. No one gives that. I doubt he does. Medical insurance. No bars give that, or restaurants, unless you work full-time, and they never give you 40 hours. Employee discount 25%. Shift meals and other perks. Shit meals would be more like it, because all this food is shit. You need to have a Class 12 mixologist and food handler's permit. You need to have an attitude. You love music and non-mainstream culture. Another sexual weirdo who has been rehabbing his image lately, he just jumped back on Twitter, is Dan Price. Remember him? CEO Jesus, they call him. He gained a lot of publicity for promising everyone that worked at his credit card processing tech startup bullshit company, minimum of $50,000, and got in some trouble for being handsy. You can find out more about Dan by going to Doomed Planet episode number 41, Seattle Tech Villains, Dan Pay Cut Price.
I've heard from some people who say that the story is really graphic and that they've cried or that they've gotten nauseated.
July 19, 2018, by Sydney Brownstone. 5 women accuse Seattle's David Meinert of sexual misconduct, including rape.
We're here, of course, to talk about this article that you broke yesterday. It's regarding Seattle business owner Dave Meinert. Now, for people who aren't familiar with Meinert, explain to us who he is.
David Meinert is a major figure in the Seattle nightlife scene, in restaurants, and politics.
How do we make sure that doesn't happen again?
He's been around for several decades. He co-owns a number of very popular restaurants on Capitol Hill. He co-owns the Comet. I believe he owns Lost Lake. He owns the 5 Point. He is also pretty outspoken about some political issues like the $15 minimum wage and the head tax, but he's a name that most people know.
And how long were you working on this story?
I worked on this story on and off for about 6 months.
August 10th, more women come forward to accuse David Meinert of sexual misconduct. August 10th, Paige Cornwell, Seattle Times, staff reporter. Dave Meinert's sexual misconduct allegations reverberate through Seattle's music, nightlife, political circles. Now, I never went out much. I have a instinct for self-preservation. I was not out at the bars every night for 20 years like Meinert, but I have anecdotes about running into him. So imagine, everyone else in town does too. Over 2 decades in the public eye, David Meinert has been described as a power broker, a tenacious businessman, and an activist. He's opened popular bars, managed top-of-the-chart bands, and put money and endorsements into successful political campaigns. But in the past month, the power he wielded across the city has been dismantled. We'll now jump forward to October 4, 2019. The iconic Mecca Cafe has officially reopened under new owner David Meinert. Meinert, who has been accused of multiple sexual assaults, was granted a full liquor license for the venue.
For your listening pleasure, we've got David Meinert here with us today. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks.
Oh, Dave. You went from being king of Seattle nightlife to appearing on a Crazy Guys podcast and also being the subject of this Crazy Guys podcast episode. One thing about the Mecca Cafe is that it's been described as Dave Meinert's hunting grounds. Some of his victims ran into him first at the Mecca, met up with him there. Dave, it didn't have to be this way. Dave liked many things: music, art, civic engagement, and assaulting women.
I usually don't like saying I'm an entrepreneur because it sounds like what I do is more about the business than about the content. And I really just try to do things I like.
Thank you for listening to the Doomed Planet podcast, episode 80, Two Seattle dive bar dicks. Goodbye.
5, 6, 7, 8. Goodbye. This is the end of the song.
Welcome to Seattle Voices. My guest today is Dave Meinert, nightlife and entertainment entrepreneur, and I won't call you man about town, but...
Good, don't do that.
Bye! Good luck, so long!